Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder, and we are, of course, once again back into the Billy Meyer material. And I must admit to you, I am still stuck on page 224 in the Might of Thoughts book. And I am making these very slow steps to make any kind of progress on this at all. Let me digress shortly, because in looking up some information related to the information in the Might of Thoughts on that particular page, I stumbled across the concept that I've talked about before. And it's not a simple concept. It's called the we form. And evidently, all of humanity is connected in a kind of unconscious spiritual bond, and also in a subconscious way. And that information, that relationship between all people, forms something called a we form. And let me read this to you quickly. It comes from the Future of Mankind site. It says, the reason that these voices can come into existence is based simply on the fact that all humans generate a we form in an unconscious and spiritual bond that deposits its entire knowledge as a unit and individually in the ethereal record files, in the Akashic records of the planet. Now, in this case, let's assume this is Billy writing here, which I'm certain it is. He's talking about voices that people can hear. And without getting off on a gigantic tangent, all human beings are connected via this unconscious spiritual bond and this subconsciousness. This connection is called the we form. And all of humanity is connected in this way. And there are things that can be triggered by this we form. There's another we form related to these spiritual levels. One is called the Patali level, which is the final stage, I believe, of humanity. In the process of reincarnation, the final stage is the Patali level. And at the Patali level is where we merge back with creation. Okay, I mean, if you remember us talking about reincarnation from the Meyer perspective, and I'll get this back to the Might of Thoughts here in a roundabout way. It's going to take me a while to get there, unfortunately. There is going to be a great change that occurs on this earth when we, from a scientific perspective, discover the reality of reincarnation. Let me read another section this is from the Future of Mankind site. It's on reincarnation. It says, at present, our culturally composed agreements surmise that reincarnation doesn't exist. This is purely theoretical, they say, and is given to religion for the entertainment industries. Presently and officially, nothing exists according to the current leading Earth scientific and academic thinking. The paradigm will not continue indefinitely, though. A tough arduous battle is in the wings of the scientific area, and some form of revision of this position is inevitable, requiring any one of the individually possessed evolution discoveries to trigger a revolution in thinking. Now listen to what it says here. The scientific discovery of the survival of death and reincarnation would cause a much greater shift and change in consciousness, a global revolution, than a public landing of ETs. One of the key principles of Meyer's reincarnation information is that we take a great deal of time in the beyond area, developing a rough outline of our future life. Now that's interesting. That's something I'm really even not that aware of. Maybe we could look at that quickly today. So we could say the discovery is instead dependent on another factor, that it depends on the possibility to reveal the information openly, rather than knowing it, because we could have built the revealing the science of it into our current lives. I don't think I'll continue into that section here. Let me shift gears here slightly. Oh, it goes to the references here. But anyway, there's a gigantic change coming, and there's going to be a huge scientific battle when the people on the earth finally discover the reality of reincarnation. I'm going to get back to this in the Might of Thoughts again, because one of the aspects that I wanted to cover quickly was this concept of triggering things, because we can be triggered. You know, you've heard the term before, this person was triggered. In other words, their emotions got out of control. Misdirected thoughts trigger emotions. I think I made the title of the show that. And I wanted to talk about this whole idea of triggering for a minute. Okay, let me read what it says. This is on page 224. This is in contrast to when tangled ideas confuse the thoughts and abruptly go from one extreme to another, whereby a misdirection of the thoughts arises, which triggers emotions. So when your thoughts are misdirected, that's when your emotions are triggered. That means your thoughts are going in the wrong direction. They're incorrect. There's something that's gone wrong with your thinking. And now you're emotional. That's different than feelings. Remember, feelings normally grow from the thoughts. Emotions are triggered. They're very difficult to control. And emotions are triggered when the thought is not correct. I'll continue. And I sent some of this information to Marianne in Switzerland, and she's going to look at this in some of the German. But when your emotions are triggered, it's very dangerous, because this can lead to murder and manslaughter. So misdirected thoughts trigger emotions. To misdirect means to send someone or something to the wrong place, the wrong direction. A trigger is something that causes an event or a situation to happen. Okay, you've got a situation in family life or work life. Something's been triggered. You've got this situation to deal with. There's even a Might of Thoughts article on the Future of Mankind site, which talks about triggering a little bit. And I'll read this one little part. I don't know what page it's on. It's actually on in the book. It says, if, however, the human being is not powerful enough in his thoughts and feelings, and this goes back to the life force we were talking about the past couple of shows, the Lebenskraft. If you're not powerful enough in your thoughts and feelings, as well as in your will to live, Then what can be triggered, there's our trigger word, triggered is a self-destruct mechanism. So misdirected thoughts can trigger emotions. If your Lebenskraft, if your thoughts and feelings and your will to live is too weak, then that can trigger a self-destruct mechanism through your incapacity for life and your powerlessness for life. I want to digress a little bit again. I'm digressing everywhere. It seems like lately when I'm studying the Meyer information, whoa, I get hit in the head with a sledgehammer. I want to talk about Contact Report 251 and the genetic manipulations that have occurred to the people of the Earth. As you know, the history of the Earth is very convoluted. It's very complicated. One aspect of this deals with the genetic manipulation that occurred for human beings on the Earth. A good part of us came from the Cirrus system. The Cirrus system in a different space-time configuration. Boy, there are many rabbit holes that we could go down. The space-time in our universe is divided into 7 layers, let's say. 7 different space-time configurations. In one of these space-time configurations, in the Cirrus system, there was a group of people who left Lyra Vega and went to planets in the Cirrus system. They tried to solve the problem of warfare using genetic manipulations. They found out that they lost their will to fight and were losing their will to survive, literally, and they became vulnerable to other aggressive spacefaring races. So they quickly had to come up with a quick fix for the situation, since they had genetically removed the ability to fight in their population. Because one of the big problems with the people from Lyra Vega is they would rise to this high level of technology and destroy themselves again through warfare. Sounds familiar. So the people from the Cirrus system decided to create a branch of their own humanity. They were going to genetically manipulate them and do it in such a way that it would be passed down through the generations, and the people would have a shortened lifespan of 120 years, which is what we have on the Earth, and a intensified will to fight. So what that means is we can be triggered easily. Okay? That's why it's a genetic issue. It's down to our genes. We are fighters down to our genes. I don't think this is something to be proud of. It's a self-destructive thing. It's a bad situation. When do we get triggered? Well, we're told in Contact Report 251 how we're triggered. Let me read it to you. It says the genetic manipulations do not imply that terrestrial man is a born killing machine, but signify only that he is a combative life form. Does anyone out there, does anyone else watch the UFC? And if you don't know what that is, look it up. It's the Ultimate Fighting Championships. It's one of the biggest growing sport in the world, where people beat each other's brains out. Now, why do we want to watch that? Because we have a genetic manipulation. Let me continue. But signify only that he is a combative life form capable of killing when required to do so, or when events trigger his loss of control or outbursts. Such actions may also lead to degeneration, but generally they only occur when 2 factors, the consciousness and the psyche, hence the person's world of thoughts and feelings, are afflicted or briefly overburdened. So when your consciousness is overburdened, that's when you will be triggered. And I suspect that without the genetic manipulation, it would be very, very hard to trigger us. Whereupon they prompt the act committed in the heat of passion. Therefore, the evil brought about, or rather fostered by the genetic manipulation, is not an intrinsic compulsive inborn lust to murder. It's not that. We don't have an inborn lust to murder, but we can be triggered when our consciousness is overburdened. Now, I was talking about the we form earlier, and there is another thing that's going on in the we form of the people of the earth. All the people of the earth were connected at an unconscious and subconscious level through this we form, and it almost operates as a single unit. I mean, if you want to see the we form in action, look at the people mesmerized by the cell phones that the elite have given them as part of their, how can I say this, a part of your slavery. The world, geez, I'm so dramatic today, but the world has just gone complete madhouse. People are addicted to these cell phones. That's part of that, I'm saying, is the function of the we form, the subconsciousness. So there's another thing that's going on in the we form of the earth, and that's this whole delusion, and I say delusion of being abducted by extraterrestrials, which began in America and to which so far countless people have fallen prey. It's now even spreading through Switzerland. And the result is a collective mass delusion, a mass hysteria, which is nothing more than a collective mass psychosis that has now expanded into a collective myth. It is a collective delusion which is being transmitted from the collective human subconscious to the people who are susceptible. So there are people that are susceptible to it. This does not mean that these people are psychically ill, or that they have an impaired consciousness, or that they are insane. No, as the rule, they are what's called labile. That means they're very sensitive to this with regard to the control, recognition, and assimilation of collective influences. And I think the people that are addicted to their cell phones, which, by the way, I hate cell phones. I just want to say that. I'm venting today. Bear with me. Those people are labile too, and they're mesmerized by these little electronic devices. So, let me continue here. Hence, such individuals cannot define the influences as being what they really are. This culminates at a point where these influences are stored in the subconscious mind as reality. In fact, when the next opportunity presents itself, the pre-stored information triggers a type of conscious dream, a daydream. So these people, because subconsciously they've been influenced by these stories of people being abducted by extraterrestrials, this triggers a consciousness daydream during which the collective subconscious information, the we form information gathered and stored in the subconscious, produces a conscious dream. And these people are then accepted this conscious dream as reality. So this is, it's an example of a triggering, because these dreams are triggered by the people that are sensitive to this kind of collective mass delusion. We all are triggered when our consciousness, our thoughts and feelings are overburdened. And when we're triggered, it's because of misdirected thoughts. Because misdirected thoughts trigger emotions. So, I wanted to reel things back all the way to some very simple stuff because we're going into some advanced, we've really talked about some advanced concepts. And I talked about the whole idea of the we form. And these we forms, some of these we forms are beyond space and time in their perspectives. And I talked about the Patali. And the Patali, I think, are the ones, and these are humans that have advanced to this level. They don't have a physical body anymore. They've had hundreds of millions of reincarnations, more than that even. And now they're in these other planes, and this is another we form. And Billy's talking about this, and he brings up how important it is to steer our thoughts. And because there are a lot of influences out there, some of that comes from the we form. The we form doesn't always have correct information. It's like I was just using the example of the cell phone. The examples, some of the we form produces triggers things in people, like the we form information about abductions of extraterrestrials is also incorrect. There is we form information stored in the collective subconsciousness about religion that is incorrect. So do not allow your thoughts to drift where you can be steered by these other things, your own emotions, and triggered. Rather, take the helm in your hand and steer the ship of life to solid ground. And that's one of the things that Billy always says in the Mighty Thoughts. Steer your thoughts like a captain steers his ship. Always take the helm firm in your hands and do not let the waves rip it away from you. And this requires optimism. Never losing your conviction about a good end. And I guarantee you there are going to be some difficulties. Real optimism fulfills an extraordinarily important function in life, and you should really focus on optimism. And I want to go through the important things to tell yourself, and this is found between pages 200 and 230. Learn to control anxiety so it doesn't control you. And the most important thing to do with gaining control of your anxiety is learn the underlying cause of your anxiety. So don't allow the anxiety to control you. And let me tell you, it's sometimes difficult to really get down to the bottom of what can cause anxiety. And if you overcome anxiety, this happens through the intellect. And let me go through some of these ideas. And when you get in really bad anxiety, or you've been triggered, and now maybe you're very angry, there's a way to snap out of this. And what I do is I have a list of these concepts that Billy's talked about. First of all, I'm confident. And I think this is a real important one to say first to yourself, I'm confident. Because I think a lot of anger and anxiety are from, at some level, a lack of confidence. Much of our negative thinking comes from a lack of confidence, self-doubt, anxiety. And sometimes I'm plagued by self-doubt. I don't know why. Telling yourself that you're confident can break the cycle of negative thinking. We have to gain control of our anxiety so it doesn't control us. And look to try to understand that unknown that's causing your anxiety. Tell yourself you're optimistic, you're cheerful, you're relaxed, you're enthusiastic, you're thankful, you're in harmony. Tell yourself to persist, to persevere, to endure, to be calm and to be satisfied. And this is the tricky one because it'll sneak up on you where you're not satisfied with things, particularly when it's dark and cold in the middle of the winter and you've just had enough of the dark and cold and the snow. Don't let yourself be triggered. Don't become dissatisfied. Even the simplest human being, the weakest, the slightest, can reach very high heights and achieve prosperity if you develop self-control, composure, cheerfulness, and allow your creational nature to come to the front. Quick review. We have a material consciousness and a spiritual consciousness. Your material consciousness is who you are in this lifetime. It's the part of you that had to learn to walk and talk and control your emotions, that had to grow up again. But you have an aspect of yourself called the spiritual consciousness that has stored all the wisdom of your previous lifetimes. That's your innermost creational nature. It's your innermost personality. Now the problem is these two aspects of yourself are kind of in opposition because your personality this lifetime is threatened by your evolution. And I think it fights. It fights tooth and nail because literally, I don't know how to put this into words quite the way it's threatened. I'll just say that. It's threatened. It knows that its influence over you is, its days are numbered. If you're dealing with this Maya material, you will continue to be influenced more and more by your innermost creational personality. And the false ego, sometimes called, I think it's Eratz, self in the German, is threatened by this. So, let me continue. Cheerfulness is the quality or state of being noticeably happy and optimistic. Cheerfulness is likely to dispel gloom and worry. Heiterkeit is the German word for cheerfulness. And this comes from, Billy has another book. It's called Meditation from Clear Visibility. And it says, I feel joy's testimony within myself and fill it in with cheerfulness, diligence, and a very hard word to say, indefatigability. Now that meditation from clear visibility has a lot of really good sayings with it. Let me continue. We should be strong, calm, knowledgeable, wise, peaceful, joyous, loving, open, and freely thinking human beings. A person that is calm is not showing or feeling nervousness, anger, or emotions. Calm is talked about by Svath. Remember, Svath was Billy's first mentor, extraterrestrial man that used to land his silvery pear-shaped craft in Switzerland, in northern Switzerland, Block, Switzerland, right around 1945, I think was the first landing, but he had contacted Billy telepathically by about 43, and he would take young Edward Albert Meyer up into the ship and teach him about what was going to happen in his future, teach him about what was going to happen on Earth, and even put a device on Billy's head that protected Billy's consciousness from other people who would try to get in, as well as it awakened certain abilities that Billy had in his previous lives to look into the future. But one of the things that Svath told him on the ship is, he said, learn to control yourself in these things and to always remain calm, because that is the best weapon and the best defense against any attack. So Svath told Billy the best defense against any attack is remaining calm. So, for the most part, you can see the calmness of Billy all the time. And even though he's 80 years old now, he still has that quiet confidence, that calmness. And it says on page 212, it says, a change must begin within the individual. And each of us can be this individual. Nobody can afford just simply to look around and wait for someone else who's supposed to do that which one will not do oneself. Let me give you an application of this. It's very hard to get people to even come forward and speak about the Meyer material. You can get Michael Horn, sometimes. You can get Michael Uderbrook from FIGU Canada sometimes, and a few others. But a lot of people won't come forward and talk about this information. So this is one of the things I had to learn. There are certain things which you will have to do yourself that you never even thought that you would be doing. Along these lines, in other words, you're not waiting for a savior to come in and do this for you. You're going to have to go out and do it yourself. That's one of the first things you learn in the Meyer information. And you would have never thought you would have to sometimes do what you have to do. But so there's no salvation teaching. And the Meyer information says this teaching cannot be supported because every single human being creates his or her own salvation through his or her own thoughts and their might, as well as his feelings, his acts, his deeds, and according to how he confronts the obligation of his responsibility and manages his life. And cheerfulness and calm, it's on page 212 if you have the 2014 edition. Cheerfulness and calm is on that page. It talks about these two concepts if you want to go back and refresh your memory. I continually have to do that sort of thing. It says, the cheerfulness in a lived form is more valuable for the human being and more desirable than gold, platinum, or diamonds. It is a work of knowledge, of wisdom, and of lived practical experience. Let me just say that the Meyer material is very interesting. I had an email conversation with Marianne in Switzerland, and we were talking about state of the world, and she sent me some pictures of Switzerland, which were really cool. It was the really coolest thing she could have sent me because I think there's nothing more inspirational than the creation. And she wanted to see a couple of these passages. She no longer even has an English version of the Might of Thoughts book, which I thought was interesting. I guess she may still have the German version. But I thought about that for a while. My book is falling apart. I've read it and highlighted it. So much things are falling off of it all the time. So, and this is just one of Billy's writings. It's so down to earth. And I originally came from all this material from an exopolitical point of view and interested in ancient history and the higher lifestyle of these people and the technology, but the spiritual aspect interests me as well. But as you get into the Meyer material more and more, it's really about the spiritual aspect of things. And if you haven't, I took a long time before I got to Billy's books. I went through the contact reports mostly. That was where my focus was. And I still have a great affinity for that. But it's just so critical to get to these books. It's where it affects your life directly. Let me let me just quote a few things. And it's very good to commit some of this to memory. Let me tell you, it will help you very much in your thinking. And I was overlooking this very information today about, it's in Love Letter 27, and I don't have it in front of me, and these may be not verbatim exactly what the English says, but it says that love is the highest principle in all creation, and through it everything exists in absolute logic. So let me tell you, true love is logical. It's absolutely logical. And it continues and it says, every tiny plant and every tiny animal fulfills its purpose in love. And you've seen this before. You've seen a kitten. You've seen a puppy. You've seen the birds and the small rabbits. All of these animals, outside of the prey relationship between a predator, they're just love. And the prey-predator relationship is also part of the logic of creation, because the higher animals are supported in that way by the lower animals, but not of their free will. They don't understand that. But the predators are hardwired at predation, but they're not destructive to the creation in that way. Generally speaking, the only creature that's destructive to creation is humanity, because we have to go through this long process of the evolution of our consciousness, and we learn things about creation along the way. For example, how to make gunpowder, and how to shoot people and shoot animals, and how to build things like bulldozers, which destroy trees and forests and wooded areas. We learn these things without having the wisdom to handle them. So we do many things that are destructive because we're not following the law of love. Remember, love is the highest principle in all creation, and through it everything exists in absolute logic. So if you're functioning in the law of love, you will function in a logical way. You'll be cheerful. You'll be calm. You see how the creational natural laws work. They're very comprehensive in that way. In fact, it says that the splendor of nature is the visible expression of the love of creation. So this universal consciousness radiates love outward to all of the rest of creation, all of its creation, all of its created things. It's radiating this love to. Now, all animals, all plants respond to this love as they should. They fulfill their purpose in love, except man, who has this free will, who has this evolution of the consciousness. He can ignore the radiating love of creation and do his own thing, right? He can build a nuclear bomb if he wants, and get together with a bunch of people, set one off just for the fun of it, and just see what happens. And that's what's happening in the world today. If we were cheerful and calm, we could start to do a better job at fighting against this. Instead of making life a joy, many human beings are the exact opposite. They're grumpy, they waste their lives away, they ruin their lives as the result of explosive outbursts, and they destroy everything which is beautiful and splendid. So don't do that. The great majority of terrestrial humanity, they're sick with a negativism that has more or less ruined their lives and disregarded and destroyed their evolution because of the lack of self-control, the lack of understanding, the lack of obligation-based feelings of responsibility. Let me talk about the Lebenskraft again, the life force. Billy says to search for the source of the life force. And this is what I was trying to talk to Marianne about a little bit today. I think the life force it comes from your thoughts. So you have to find out what thoughts generate this enthusiasm in you for life. You may find it's in some places that you didn't think it was. One thing I've noticed is, at least in me, is that exercise generates this enthusiasm for life. There are other things that may generate the enthusiasm also. So search for these things in you because they trigger a kind of opposite of negativism. When you have the influence of the Lebenskraft or the life force, you have the opposite of negativism. You have great enthusiasm, kind of a happiness, and a sense of motion takes over in your life. Now, negativism is the practice or the tendency to be negative, skeptical, failing to offer positive suggestions or views. The other thing we have to learn is the sense of perseverance and persistence is so critical. And from Billy's Meditation from Clear Visibility book, it says, hard work matters to me and promotes my creative capabilities. Also my perseverance, the joy in working, and the will of goal achievement. But if there is no optimism, and if it is not created, then no progress can be achieved because the thoughts are weak and powerless. They collapse, which is further effect that the purely physical weakness appears. So you can even, when your thoughts get weak, again, then you'll have a physical weakness which can come onto your body if you have no optimism. We have an innermost nature. It's described this way. It says, that is the nature of his or her own personality, and he himself, herself determines and forms it according to his own will, which can be fundamentally different to the real innermost spiritual nature. And that's the two selves, remember, the irat self, the false self, as opposed to the real innermost spiritual nature. We actually have three natures. We have an external nature, an internal nature, and an innermost spiritual nature. So, your spirit form is a fragment of the universal consciousness. It comes into the body of the child at 21 days. It brings the energy for life for the whole body of the child. It causes the heart to beat. The energy forms a lattice structure internally within the body of the whole child. The spirit form energizes the entire body. If, for example, you would get a finger cut off or a hand or an arm or something like that, the energy kind of retreats, but the spirit form itself cannot be harmed in any way. The concentrated spirit form is in the superior colliculus of the middle brain, in the area where your sight is, in the area where the integration of your thinking goes, and the integration of your all of your senses occurs in the area called the superior colliculus. Your spirit form is very old. It's about 4.5 million years old. If you're a typical Earth human, you've had many, many experiences in life. In fact, you probably lived on the Earth in very, very ancient times when there were these gods on the Earth, so to speak. One of the gods of ancient times on the Earth was called Tubal, or the god of the hunt. He's called the devil now. You may have had a life where you saw some of these gods. Let me read a little bit from the Psyche. It says here, "It is not so good that human beings of ancient times called God were simply just human beings, and that in later times some might-greedy rulers and charlatans made creating a God out of them, and therefore plunging the people into castigated and distressful unfortune and misery. The cognition of this is very easy to comprehend. If there was a God as the religions see and name him, then there would be only one single religion in the whole world, the religion of God. There would be no Confucianism, no Islam, no Hinduism, no Buddhism, just as there would also not be many other religions. There would be no Christianity, which is... Now this is what Billy says about Christianity. He says, also no Christianity, which with its religious delusion, blood-spilling wars, deceitful murders and persecutions has staged the most vile butchery of human beings in the history of the world. No other religion has ever demanded so much human blood and human beings as precisely Christianity has." I'm reading this and I'm not offended. My background is Christian. It's amazing. When you get the truth, it starts to make everything make sense. Let me continue. "In order to be a human being, a fair and good human being, no religious God is necessary. There is a creation, a universal consciousness. It's not a personification. It's a spiritual energy. It's a superintelligence. It's neutral. It's not going to rescue you. There's no salvation necessary. We die, we reincarnate, we make mistakes, we jump off buildings, we die in drownings. The universal consciousness knows you're going to reincarnate again and again and again and again and again and again and again. In order to be a human being, a fair and good human being, no religious God is necessary. A God who firstly exists only in the fantasy and deceptive imagination of the religions, and secondly is unable to give any help to the human being or other thinking, just as nothing can be divided by a zero denominator. So no help can be expected from what religion calls God. However, if we observe and consider those superhuman beings of tens of thousands of years ago who were called God by the people, the kings and emperors, because they had at their disposal tremendous spiritual and consciousness-based powers and a tremendous ability, then we recognize that the name God nevertheless denotes something special, namely a form of human spiritual and consciousness-based ability. It denotes, therefore, a human being who has brought his or her spiritual consciousness, cognition, as well as her spiritual, as well as a conscious thinking and ability to a certain high standing. Let me continue. It follows, therefore, that every human being is God himself or herself. Wow, that's a shocker for religious backgrounds. If he or she is able to realize that in a consciousness-based manner, and if he or she thinks beyond the normal train of thought of the simple human being and beyond the irrational teaching of the religions, then the human being is therefore God himself or herself. We remain with the ancient handed-down word. Thus also determine their own life, and this is the important thing, I think. You determine your own life path, your destiny, your health, your ups and downs over the course of your entire lifespan. For this, only his or her thinking and his or her will are required. And the cognition that the human being, and this is Billy's words, himself or herself is God. When the human being dies, as in the spirit dwelling within discards it like an old coat. That's one thing I wanted to say, and I read this somewhere. I'll have to try to find it again. That the spirit form is in the body as a kind of guest. The spirit form knows that it's just a guest, and this is temporary arrangement. Let me reread this. When the human body dies, then the spirit dwelling within it discards it like an old coat, the body. But the spirit does not die with the body. It only escapes from it in order to continue to live and to continue to function. The spirit form in its thinking and activity form, the so-called eternal spirit, this never dies and will always live. Differently, however, than what the Christian religion teaches, and also differently than what many other religions teach. So we do physically die. The spirit form goes into the other realm. It takes your consciousness from your life that you just had, and it takes that consciousness and puts it in a storage bank called the overall consciousness block, and it processes all of your previous life memories and distills down what's called the evolutive values, and that's your optimism, your confidence, your sense of fairness, your love, your logic, and all the things you've learned in this life. It distills them down into their evolutive essences, and your spirit form absorbs that information. So that becomes part of your spiritual consciousness. And this is the process that goes on in this other dimension, this energy band around our planet. This is what goes on during the death process. So there's a striving that occurs in the death process. There's still work going on. There's still striving that goes on in the death process. And striving is one of the creational natural laws that I continually talk about. Striving creates the life right up to the being. Striving means delectation, satisfaction in a form which is always fulfilling and progressive. To be without striving means unwillingness and affliction. So if you're being afflicted, you're just going to have to strive more. And believe me, I understand. Sometimes we go through periods of very, very intense striving. Inhibited striving and inhibited life bring inhibited evolution and stagnation. Hopelessness, grief, confusion. So if you're suffering from hopelessness, grief, confusion, then you need to even strive even harder, and that will start to solve some of these problems of the grief, the joylessness, the unpeace, the self-deceit, the reluctance for life, and all that. And work on your optimism, on your sense of calm and your sense of peace. Therefore, it is necessary to search for the source of the life power and develop the power in order to have a reliable life potential on which you can depend, on which you can completely trust. And the source of the life power, which you must create yourself, which was a shocker for me, lies in the consciousness. That is to say, in its thoughts, which must be formed, tended, and nurtured in such a way that they correspond to a progressive, kind and wise, equipped with a zeal for life, and intention, and endeavor, and ideal. And that's page 224. And I actually have an alternative translation to that, which I sent to Marian, which I want to get her feedback on. Listen to this alternative translation. I don't know if this is a good translation or not, but I find it profoundly interesting. The source of self-generating life force, the source of the self-generating life force is in the consciousness, respectively, in deep thoughts, which must be designed, nurtured, and maintained in such a way that they correspond to a progressive manner, provided with a zeal for life, an aspiration, an idea. And what I really liked about that was the fact that it says, the source of the self-generating life force. That's interesting to me because our thoughts are self-generating this life force in us. And once you get a handle on the habits in your life that generate this life force, you can sense when that life force is generating. And the source of the self-generating life force is in the consciousness, respectively, in deep thoughts, which must be designed. You have to design those deep thoughts that you have and nurture them and maintain them so that you can have this zeal for life, this what's called an ideal, I-D-E-A-L, which is more of a complete thing. And in Contact Report 39, and I know I'm running out of time, we talked about something related to the life force. Let me dive into this. It says, then the case is indeed clear. There's something else, however, that you should explain for everyone for the interests of our cause, namely the connections of certain connections with the age of the earth human being. I already know about these things because Svath informed me about them when I was a boy. Nevertheless, these things were never written down, so others are not oriented to them. I'm referring to the fact that the mental forces of every single human being are capable of raising or lowering the life form of others. And I may not be pronouncing this perfectly, Lebenskraft, but your thoughts can raise your own life force as well as lower the life force of others or raise the life force of others. Let me continue here. We're running out of time here. Because the thinking of a life form through the cooperation of the spirit produces an extremely logical, thus creation-related force that is released as a high-frequented vibration or radiation. A tremendous force thus produced which can influence everything. And it goes on to talk about how the people of the earth have 1,000-year lifespans in the past because of just the power of this life force was part of it. Well, I think I'm running out of time here, folks. So I want to thank you for listening. You've been listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.